So the last couple of meetings, I was saying that I was going to throw out the Arduino IDE for the ST micro boards because it just doesn't seem to want to play. It's just too hard to track everything down. Well, in the meantime, I decided, well, maybe I will use it because the Bluepill board. Let me bring up some visuals here. Change camera, change background. None. So the Bluepill board, which is this one, it turns out it will do everything. It's got, if I put a bootloader on it, it works just like an Arduino Nano. So I can works just like an Arduino Nano. So you just plug in the USB cable and say upload, and it does. You don't have to do any extra screwing around. And I've been running it for a few days, and it's hasn't blown away the bootloader yet. So that's probably a good thing. And then I had the Blackpill board, which has 4 times as much flash space and 3 times as much RAM space. And it's got a Cortex M4, so it's got hardware floating point, if that's important to people. And I was trying to think what other fancy features it has. It's got these stupid little dip switches on it to run the built-in bootloader. You have to move these little microscopic dip switches. Does this work?
Yep.
But they're can you mute your microphone, Terry, so I don't have to mute you? So anyway, it's got the little tiny dip switches that are a real pain to use, and it will work, but it's just, just a pain to do that. Now, the problem with this one is I can't get my encoder stuff to run on this board. So if I load up the Arduino code that runs just fine on this board, and I load it on this one, it will not talk to the timers, and I have no idea why. I don't know if it's a configuration thing or whatever. So that's a problem, trying to get that one to run and get my encoders to work on it. Then I move up to the F407 board, and it's got twice as many IO pins and more peripherals. But basically, this is just a chip on a board. It's got a USB port, and then it's also got an SD flash card socket, and it's got a some kind of a flash chip on the board. Now this one, for some reason, when I tried to program this one with Arduino, it will not initialize the USB port correctly. So it will not work. I cannot get this to work under that Arduino stuff. And then I've got the original F4 Discovery board. It's basically, these two basically have the same chip. This just has a lot more junk on the board, and I can't get it to initialize this USB either. But on this board, they went to the trouble to make this a full on-the-go USB port, which means it's got some extra power switching and stuff. So that might be why this board won't work. But I cannot get this board to work. I can't get the USB to work on this board, and I can't get my encoders to work on this board. But on the Bluepill board, everything seems to work. And so I decided, if I've also, for the last few months, kept saying, you could make a slave processor to your whatever your main processor is. So over here, I've got 2 Bluepill boards stuck into a dual proto board, and I just got them hooked together with a UART connection. So I can make one of those the master that would talk to Ros over the USB, and then the other one, say if this was the slave board, it just talks to the other board over a UART there. So I can now put whatever I want on this board. So if I put my encoder stuff on this board, then that doesn't screw up all the stuff on the master board, because as soon as you start assigning things, it starts using up IO pins, it starts using up peripherals, and you can have conflicts. So this would move the stuff off onto this board. Plus, if I'm programming in Arduino, I still have all the stuff. I have PWM outputs, I got analog out inputs, and all that kind of stuff. So I first I put the 2 boards on here and wired the UARTs together, and just from the slave, I just said print something, and on the master, I just said, if there's data available, read it in, and then spit it out the USB port so I could see it was working. And that all seemed to work. And I did some more digging, and I found something that's an official Arduino library called SerialTransfer, and it will it's designed to do exactly this. So it sends packets of data back and forth, and it's got things like, it's got like a start of message byte and an address byte and a byte count, and then your payload, and then it's got then it's got a CRC, and it's got then an end of packet byte, and they've got all that figured out for you. So you just load it on here. It's being Arduino stuff. You just load it up and say, I want to use that. And then I found an example on Instructables, And the guy says, here, download these libraries, and here's my sample code. So load the code on this board, and load the code on this board, and they'll talk. Well, it didn't work, and I kept poking at it. I finally went out to the GitHub where the guy published this stuff, and I took his examples, and his examples work. So the guy on Instructables misinterpreted what the fields of the, passing the parameters when you say, put this data into the buffer. There's one field that I don't know what it was called, but the Instructable guy assumed that was going to be the total byte count of what you're trying to send, but it's actually a pointer into the buffer. So you should put in 0 and not the length of what you want to send. And after you call that thing, it returns a new pointer to where you're at in the buffer, so you can stack up stuff if you want to inside of that. But anyway, I got that running, and that does indeed seem to work. So theoretically, if I put my encoders here, I can read the 2 encoders and just put those into a packet and send them across to the master, and then do whatever I want with it there. So then I can do all the main calculations on the master board, or I can send it all the way up to Ros and then do the like say the odometry calculations there, or I can put the odometry calculations into this board along with the encoders. So there's a lot of flexibility in what you do there. And the fact that I've got there are 2 identical boards tied together, I can put say PWM on this board or on this board. I can do analog input on this board or this board. So you got a lot of flexibility in what you want to do there. And it's on here. I definitely won't put my encoders, but that still leaves a lot of stuff that I could make use of. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. I decided, yes, that might work, and it might be worth still trying to track down how to get this stuff to work. I guess the other things in my picture over here, this board, that's that Adafruit LoRa board with a microcontroller on it. So that's an all-in-one board. It's like an Arduino with a radio on it. And then here's on my Sammy 2, I just had one of these relay modules. You buy them on Amazon or eBay, and then this board will talk directly to this relay, and that will switch my e-stop circuit. So regardless of any of these other processors out here, see, normally I would have something like this where this thing is doing my remote control stuff, and it'll have a serial connector from here to this board, assuming I can get enough UARTs to work on that board, and that way that will tie those together. But then the relay is simply an extra piece out there that has nothing to do. So it has nothing to do with these boards out here. If these 2 are powered up and the remote control is running, then it will enable this e-stop relay and allow everything to run. So that's just something to note there. I got them had them on my pictures, so I thought I'd show those. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Yes, I can get the Arduino code to work on these, and the bootloader I put in seems to work, and I've been using it for a few days, and it hasn't crashed at all. So that seems like a reasonable way to go. So I'll play with that for another week and see what happens. And so next week I'll let you know if this worked out or did not work out, or if I've changed my mind totally again. So that's where all that's at. So is there any questions on that? And everybody's muted.
How do you put a bootloader on those that you have on your proto board?
You can either use the serial download mode and hook up an FTDI adapter and hook up the serial pins, and then I'm not sure. I've never actually done that. I think you might use the ST-Link programming software, or you might be able to do it from the Arduino stuff. I'm not sure if that will work or not. But anyway, you have to get the binary code, and then you have to load it onto the board with some download method, some upload method. I keep forgetting they do everything backwards here. Or the other thing is use the little debug module, which I don't have one on the table right now, but here's one right here. Use this little debug module, and you just plug it into your board. This has to be a Blackpill plugged in, and you just plug that in your USB, and then you can use the ST-Link software. And again, you just point to the binary, you point to the board and say go, and it just says, okay, it's done. It's loaded on there. And in fact, I'm using the command line version, so I just switch to the directory where the stuff is, and I execute one line that says something like ST-Link upload, name of the file, and something else, and I hit enter, and within about a second, it says, okay, it's done, it's ready to go. And that's all it takes to get that bootloader on there. And then it should just work after that. If you don't, if you use that debug module to program the board again, it overwrites your bootloader. But if you're always using the bootloader, it seems to work. So that's so far I'm happy with it. We'll see what happens on that. Let's see if I do this. So I'll just move on here, I guess, or I'm going to say I guess I'm done here is what I'm trying to say. So who's next?
You posted in Slack about that visualizer. I went out and looked at that for just a minute or so. Did you spend any time on that?
No, I didn't. I saw that the guy that started the thread said he was doing, trying to get all this stuff to work, and his question was, he's got all the internal stuff working now. How does he display it on the screen? And somebody else said, "Oh, here, go look at this guy's code." And so that YouTube video I posted is actually somebody else's code, but that's also says it has a GitHub with it, and theoretically you could just download that and put it on and start running. But no, I haven't done anything with any of that stuff other than noted that it was there.
It definitely looked nice.
It'd certainly be easier than doing it from scratch. That would be great to be able to do that.
Harry, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
I'll let you go.
Not a lot of progress, but a couple of material things. So this is my launch file at the moment, trying to get a real world, trying to move from simulation to the real world. And, I'm not going to go through this line for line, but it's out there. And it basically starts the left odom, the right odom, getting data from the wheel encoders, starting the IMU, again, all using, well, this had its own driver, but this was using Ros Serial, the Python version of that. And then I had to work through getting a TF, the transformation tree straightened out, which I mentioned on Slack, and they've got that at least to a working point. I'm not sure why I don't see that on here now. Thought I posted oh yeah, there it's coming up. So, getting it's probably painfully hard to see. Where's I'm doing control scroll button, but it's not enlarging. Anyway, you can't see that, but a map up here, ODOM going into base footprint, going into base link with the GPS over here. And, I've not messed around with the stuff at the bottom past the simulation step. And I had to do what's called broadcast a transform in my ODOM program in order to get it to link with base footprint. So thanks, Jeff, for helping point that out. And then the wheel ODOM software is looking like this at the moment. Unfortunately, X and Y are not getting published correctly. So at the moment, I'm debugging this program, trying to figure out why I'm not getting what I expect to get at that level. So that's my limited but righteous progress so far. And looking at the rain forecast, it's supposed to rain for 3 out of the next 4 days. So I'll do what testing I can.
Have you thought about, if you're trying to get your wheel odometry to work, have you thought about what you're going to do with that once it's running?
Yeah, the notion is, um, have an ODOM program that when I have RTK fix gets ODOM from GPS RTK, and when I lose RTK, hopefully for just a second or two, it flips over to the wheel ODOM. That's my goal.
Something to keep in mind here, the wheel odometry is not going to give you an absolute position in the world like the odom you're getting out of Gazebo right now does. It's essentially just duplicating your GPS location. So you turn it on and says, yes, you are here in the yard pointing this direction, and everybody's happy. Now the wheel odometry, when you start it up, it always starts at an XY theta of 000. So
Right.
wherever your vehicle is, it says you're at 00 pointed in a direction of 0. And there's just the standard way everybody does it. Nobody ever initializes that to anything. So as you drive around, that's definitely not going to match what's coming off your GPS, because if there's no attempt to match those together, that's not going to work. And then the other thing is it's going to drift on you. So if you started it up and you drive around for 10 minutes and then you say you're going to have it switch from GPS to your wheel odometry, well, it may have drifted enough that by the time it switches, you might be off by 10 feet or 20 feet or something by the time the thing switches. And then when you say switches, that brings up another point. You could theoretically do it like, that program called command velocity mux that people use. And that one, switch between what's the source of command velocity to use. You could create a node, something like that you decide, do I want to listen to GPS or do I want to listen to the wheel odometry? So you could make it switch back and forth that way. Typically what people do once they get the wheel odometry working, then you go and you pull up that whole what's it called, robot localization. So you put in an EKF filter that will merge your wheel odometry and your IMU together, and to give you, I think they call it a corrected odometry or something like that. And then they put in a second instance of the EKF filter, and that will merge your corrected odometry with your GPS. And then that just automatically, if your RTK drops out, then it starts taking the values from your wheel odometry. So you don't have to physically switch anything. It tracks that stuff all the time, and whatever it thinks is right is what it's going to use. Now, I've never actually tried that, so I don't know how well that works, but I believe that's the way people do that.
Do you think you would want to, I guess I'm going to call resync the wheel odometry X and Y with the GPS while you've got GPS, so that when GPS goes down, it's got a relatively current value?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, my thinking is I believe Jeff's, I'm going to call it the EKF approach, is technically the right way to do it. I'm leaning to more toward the way that you just described, and that is save the X and Y position until the last good, the last good RTK fix, and then only use the movement since the last good GPS fix, because Jeff's right. Wheel odometry is inherently noisy and slippage and all kinds of things. So, and again, I'm working under the assumption that, if I'm in the yard an hour, I'm going to lose RTK fix 2 minutes of that 60. And so, I'm just thinking I'll be able to capture the last good RTK pose and only use wheel odometry from the last good RTK pose. Because the EKF thing, quite honestly, although I can spell it, besides spelling it I'm not sure I've got the skills to make that all work.
Yeah, I've never tried that, but there seem to be enough tutorials and everybody says, here, just do this and it'll work. And I don't know. Yeah, I've heard that before, so I don't know how well it really is going to work. But there are a couple of comments on that. As Terry says, you could, I believe he used the term sync the two together. Now, if you just wanted to run the wheel odometry, you know, because I said when you first initialize the wheel odometry, it thinks you're at 000. What you could do is just subscribe to a new topic that says, it says set odometry position or whatever you want to call it. And if you just create an external message and say grab the XY theta from the GPS and then post it on that topic, then your wheel odometry would say, oh, somebody posted some correction data. And then just, so initially, as soon as you start it up, you could set all your values to wherever it says you are in the yard. So that'd be one way to do that. And then back to the other point, you know, take your last known good data. Well, you could just constantly, you know, every time you know you've got a good value from GPS, execute that command again and just keep updating the wheel odometry so it's actually tracking right on top of what you're doing. And if you just stop updating that because you lose your RTK, then as Terry says, you have the last known good position already loaded in there. So as you drive around, it'll track somewhat by doing that. So that's a couple of different ways you could do that. Or the simplest way is simply say, just be watching your RTK and say, if I lose my RTK fix, just come to a stop and just sit there looking dumb until it comes back, and then go ahead and start running again. So that'd be a quick way around it right there.
Yeah, I like that idea. I'm thinking though, for me, when I there appears to me 2 times when RTK glitches. One is I'm in the middle of the yard and there shouldn't be a reason for it to glitch. And the other is when I have, I think they call it occlusion, when I get next to a building or next to a tree or something like that. So well, it's going to be an interesting journey to see how often I lose RTK.
It'd be interesting to log that when it does go up and down, so you could know what was my position and maybe identify, okay, here's a dead zone in your yard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
hopefully it would be that consistent.
And as Terry says, log everything. Well, Terry's new enough. You may not realize you can just say start up Ros bag record, and it records everything that's going on, everything that's being published. It dumps that into a file on your hard drive. So as long as you remember to turn that on before you start, you can come back the next day and you can play that back, and you get all the information that was created. So yes, you can do exactly that. So if you start that up and then say extract out your position and put that onto a map or onto, say, just onto RViz, so you can keep track of where you're at. And then as it drives around, you can watch your RTK data and see if it's dropping out or not. So yeah, you can do that. So you could keep track of where you are in the yard at that point. And then the other thing, if you have a Ros bag file that's got, a megabytes of data of everything you did, then you can convert that into, I think it's CSV files, and fire Plot Juggler. Plot Juggler is a really fancy plotting program you can run, and you can put all kinds of junk up on the screen and compare it together. You got a little slider, you drag it back and forth, and so your vehicle will drive around like this. You pull it back and it backs up to where it was. And so that's a really amazing program once you get that figured out, how to run that.
That's all I got. Thanks for the input.
Let me back up to my stuff again. Since you mentioned Ros Serial, I believe I have had Ros Serial running on the Bluepill board. And again, it's just a matter of, you say load up load the package on, and then pull up one of their examples. And I think it was running on the Bluepill board. So that's one more reason why that might be worth going that way. And the other thing I said on the thing I'm doing right now, I've got 2 identical Bluepill boards. One is the master and one's the slave. Well, there's no reason why the master has to be another Bluepill board. I can put on like Al is running the ESP32 board. You could use that as a master if you can get that to talk over a UART. And Terry's using that Adafruit Itsy Bitsy board. with, and again, as long as you got an extra UART on that, you could tie it to one of these Bluepill boards, and they just have a programmable peripheral processor out there to do anything you want with that. And the other thing I just said, as long as you have an extra UART available, well, when I went and looked at this SerialTransfer package that's available, you can either run a UART, or you can run I2C, or you can run SPI to tie your boards together. Now, I2C uses 2 pins and UART uses 2 pins. So either way, you're using the same number of pins on the board. But if you go to SPI, it takes either 3, I think it takes 4 IO lines to get that to work. So that starts chewing up your IO real quick on these little processors. So, but you do have the option if you wanted to run I2C, you could do that. I personally prefer not to run that, but that is yet another option. And since I just mentioned that again, I'll go track down the link to that SerialTransfer and post that in the chat here. And other than that, I guess I'm done again. So I guess we can turn it over to Terry now.
Okay. Let's see, where do I have this? Okay, this one. Okay. Everyone see Ice Snow's weekly history. Okay. I finally was able to load Ubuntu 20.04 onto my iSnow laptop. 06 is the current LTS. 04 was also an LTS, but I could never get it to complete the install. And it was one of those where I had the USB stick program from my Windows. I would plug it in, it would start booting from it, and then it said it couldn't find the file system. And Googling told me, okay, you unplug the USB stick and you plug it back in. And that seemed to work, but it would never complete the install on 06. After like 3 days of trying, I decided, okay, I'm going to 04 is what they said on the Ros wiki. So I decided to go back to that, find where I could find that on the Ubuntu org, found it, downloaded it, finally got that loaded on Monday. And during that whole time, I'd come back to my laptop, my Windows laptop, and the programs that had been open were closed. And I didn't know why. I figured, well, maybe I just got one of those Windows updates where they automatically did it and rebooted. Well, come to find out, I've been having some driver issues, and it just suddenly crashes. I get the blue screen of death. It writes its log to Microsoft and then reboots. So I'm trying to slowly work my way through the suggestions that I found for getting a new driver, getting an old driver. It seems to be related to the video card. And thinking back about a week and a half ago, the screen was suddenly glitching. So I'm not sure whether it's time to replace this, that it's the graphics board or what, but I'm starting to look at what I need to get for a new laptop. Anyway, I got that loaded. I got ROS 1 loaded onto there. I've got Visual Code loaded onto it, and I'm currently trying to get it configured so that it'll work with seamlessly with GitHub and so forth. I've also been watching some ROS tutorial videos by Robotics Backend. He has a ROS Noetic 2H30. I don't know what that means, but it's a crash course. And he does some interesting playing around with the turtle simulator and having it do some things. And so my goal during the simulator is to kind of set up a safety zone of the last 10%. And so if it's in that zone, it'll only go at a speed of 1 versus a speed of 5. And rather than running into the wall, it'll turn some random direction to try and get out of the safety zone. I just want to see what it takes. And let's see. I also want to get next week. I want to get, or this coming week, get the VNC server started on my iSnow so that I can use my multiple monitors on my Windows laptop, which are bigger than the laptop monitor. Get back to finally breadboarding all of the functions for the Itsy Bitsy by adding the A to D for the voltage measurement and the serial communications with the Raspberry Pi. Move the Itsy and associated circuitry to a solderless breadboard that I can then mount on iSnow 1. Get VNC server loaded onto the Raspberry Pi so I can work on that remotely without having to connect up a keyboard and monitor to it, because I'm wanting to have it loaded, actually mounted on the robot. And then start playing with different aspects of ROS and RViz and see where I go from there. As I mentioned, trying to get Ubuntu loaded was a royal pain. I now have this issue with my laptop, and then had some surprisingly good interviews pop up, which have taken some time, and I've got another one on Monday. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, sounds like progress. I never knew there was issues between 06 and 04, but yeah.
I couldn't find any place that mentioned that specific problem, but I just decided to try and go to the previous version. It was still a LTS, and I remember noticing that 06 wasn't what was mentioned on the ROS page. And so I was able to get it working. At least the Turtle Sim seems to work, and that's about as far as I've gotten.
And the other thing, I mean, I think it's fantastic if you try to write some code to mess around with the safety zone. I mean, the more simulators are great for that stuff, right? You're not gonna bang into anything, and it gives you a sense of accomplishment and understanding. So that's
it also kind of made me think about, I could have, when I get to the real robot, that when I'm by the edges, that I can change the speed so that it goes slower and has more time to make sure, I am in the position I think I am in, so that when it's like right next to the garage, it's going slower. It's instead of just bashing ahead, which I would want to go faster on kind of the open areas. I hadn't really considered that as an option, but it was one of those, why didn't I think of that?
I have a it reminds me, I have a shell of a program sitting somewhere where to run navigation for the tractor, the data model, if you will, is going to have, what's the GPS waypoint, what's the speed, and what's the position of, multiple actuators. I mean, those are the key data elements. And so that's what I was thinking as well, is you don't always want the same speed wherever you're at. And yeah, so I was always taught start with what data you want first, and that's what I think we need.
So I think I'll have a normal forward speed, a edge forward speed, an edge backup speed, and a normal backup speed.
Sounds good. And the BNC server, if you need any help, let me know. I mean, I've used that every day to remote into the laptop sitting on the tractor.
It was super easy to set it up on Ros using on the Raspberry using the Raspberry Pi operating system, but I've not done it with Ubuntu. So I mean, with the Raspberry Pi, you just turned it on and said, "Yep, turn VNC on," and that was all I had to do. I haven't gotten far enough to try it even on the Ubuntu. I also need more memory on the Ubuntu. It's only got 1 gig.
Yeah, let's see if I share my screen, whether that will come up.
I will stop sharing.
I mean, this is my, so I think it lets you have.
That's the client, yeah.
Yeah, 4 or 5 devices in here, and ultimately you just put in whatever the IP address is, as long as you're on the same network. And once it knows it, it will go across network. So it's like got some sort of VPN built into it. So I think the first time I ever signed on is when it's on the same network, but a lot of little networking tricks you also have to learn.
Yep.
Lots to learn.
I had some comments on trying to load your laptop. You were saying that you put in the thumb drive and you get so far and everybody tells you just pull it out and put it back in. That seems wrong. That Linux doesn't like you doing that, and I don't know. Did they have any thoughts on why that was happening? Is it because
It was
your
something
USB
about
drive?
that the script actually looks for 2 different mount points, that there's during the boot process there's 1 mount point, and then during the install it's looking for a differently named mount point. And that by unplugging it and plugging it back in, that initialization of when you plug it back in says, "Oh, I'm now this new one," or this new type. I'm not sure exactly. It worked, and it worked consistently. So it was like, as soon as you start getting that Ubuntu symbol circling in the bottom, it would just hang there. And if I hit the escape, then I would see that it said it couldn't find the file system. And if I would unplug it and plug it back in, it would then say, "Oh, now I'm checking the file system."
So when you did this install, is this the one where you booted from a flash drive and it says, "Do you want to run it or install it?" Is that
Yep.
how you did that?
Yep.
And if you could say, "I just want to test it out," and it'll come up and actually load Linux on the screen. And then at that point, there's a button somewhere that says, "Now install it." Did you go through that, or is there?
I didn't even try that. It was never mentioned.
You might want to try that. Just go ahead and let it boot up. Say, I want to just test it, and it'll load up Linux on your computer, and you'll get a desktop. And then I think there's probably an icon right on the desktop or under one of the tabs on the left. There's something that says install this to my hard drive or whatever, and then click that, and that'll take you through. And that may get around whatever this issue was you were talking about there. I don't think I've ever tried to do what you just said, where you plug in the flash drive and say directly install it without loading it first. So that might make a difference. I don't know. And the other comment was, the first time you ran it, you said you get so far and you get a purple screen. That reminded me of there's something about video drivers on certain computers that it doesn't like, and like you're saying right now, you're having problems with your screen. So it could be there's something about the video drivers, and I don't know how you.
Two different computers.
Do they both act the same way, or do they act somewhat
No.
different?
What one's the Windows one that about a week and a half ago, the screen would just like someone had there was like a loose wire that was unplugging the video. And that's on my Windows machine. And then I would come back and it had been rebooted. I've had 3 instances where I've actually been doing something. I was watching a video or doing something. It wasn't even consistent what I was doing. But then I would get the blue screen of death, and I was able to actually take a picture, and it said, here's what the stop code was. Here's what the program was that failed or caused the problem. And I took pictures of it, so I can tell you that, but I haven't downloaded the pictures.
So you're trying to load ROS under Windows, or are you trying to somehow load
No.
to?
I'm not even trying to load ROS onto my Windows machine. Let's see. The stop code was video space TDR space failure. And then under the next line says what failed, nvlddmkm.sys. That was one of them. And the other one said stop code video memory management internal. Those are the 2 stop codes I've gotten that I've seen.
You said this was on your Windows computer. You still have Windows loaded on it, or it just used
2 different computers.
Okay, but back to the fact you keep talking about Windows. What does Windows have to do with this stuff?
I've got 2 different computers. I've got my Windows laptop. I've got my Ubuntu laptop. So they're 2 totally different ones that was having 2 completely separate issues with. But since the Windows is my main machine, just for everyday use, it was a distraction. Having it reboot all the time, reboot once or twice a day.
Yeah, I can see that'd be a problem. I thought you were trying to say somehow you're trying to put Ubuntu software onto that computer, and you kept talking about
No.
Windows. So I was curious what you were doing there.
No. I had an old laptop that had XP on it, and I just got rid of the XP.
And back to the problem with the video drivers under Ubuntu. I'm not sure at what point you fix that. I would say get like I said, plug in the flash drive and load up, get a Linux desktop, and then possibly by saying install from there, it'll go out and find the right video drivers.
Now that I've got it loaded, I haven't had any issues. Now that I've got the 20.04 loaded, I haven't had any issues with the Ubuntu laptop.
Okay. I thought you were still having problems on that.
No. Now it's just a matter of getting things configured, going through setup, relearning how to do Unix stuff, because it's been years. So
Okay.
And since it ain't broke, I ain't gonna try and fix it.
That's always my approach. If it, take the easiest path and don't go off running all these other weird things that everybody likes to do. So
I have noticed that the Unix box is very slow, but it only has 1 gig of memory of RAM. So, and it's only a 1.5 gigahertz processor, single core. So, I mean, it's probably a 12 or 14-year-old laptop.
just for running just regular Ros stuff, it will probably work, but you're probably not going to try to run a simulator on that because a Gazebo, don't try to run a Gazebo simulator because it's going to take, it wants lots of space and a fast computer to do that. But just for doing, just the normal low level stuff, you can at least start with it and see how far you get on that.
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't use the same size chips I have in some of my other old laptops. And I don't know the differences between the memory sizes, but it's SODIMM 200 pin. So it looks like it's about $10 to get a 2 meg card for that. So I may be up at Micro Center just to pick some of that up. But I'll take one of my current memory chips and say, I need this size. And this board will take up to two meg memory boards. I don't know. Can I use a single 4 meg board?
I don't know. It's best to go out and Google and say, I've got this computer, something about memory. So sometimes you go out and look for the specifications from the manufacturer. It'll say down there, you can put in 2 of these or 1 of these or something. It might tell you at that point what you can do.
Okay.
But as you say, it's got so many pins on it. It's a certain size. Well, that doesn't really answer all the questions. You have to know whether it's, multiple versions of I can't even think of what they call that. I remember Alan used to complain about that at Cray all the time with oh, you can't initialize those because of something. But anyway, at each generation they go through, it might be the same, physically look the same, but you got to get the right, it has to be the right kind of memory to put in. So that's why, yeah, it would be good to hand it to somebody that knows and say, what do I need to replace this with? And write down all the information on your laptop too before you take it in. So
Right.
they're going to say what's it out of, and then you'll have all that stuff written down, and probably even write down the serial number and everything. So because sometimes they say based on serial number they change different things. So
Okay. I hadn't thought of doing the serial number, but anyway, that's where I'm at this week.
didn't you say you have like four laptops laying around? What are your other choices there besides the 14-year-old one that's
Well, my other Unix one that I had 2006 loaded on, I can't even get to the BIOS screen. The light comes on, but nothing else happens.
sometimes if you flip it over, you'll find a reset button underneath. It'll be a little tiny hole somewhere, and there's a reset. You might be able to, get it to reset the whatever. It takes it down to a fairly low level. So that's something else. Again, go look on Google and the model of the laptop and say something about reset button and see what they say on that. That might be another approach on that.
And then hang on a second. And then I've got an Asus
Whichever one has the most memory is likely the one that's gonna give you the least trouble.
Well, this one has Windows 7 on it and an i7 core. We'll have to see. But at least I have the stick now for it, so I can, and I have been through the installing Ubuntu twice. That's a good idea to see what that's got.
Yeah, so that's another point. Don't start with stuff that's too old because that's going to waste a lot of time too. So
I think that's all I've got today.
that's all I got.
That's all I got.